In Section 7, we're going to complete the conversation on the integration of customs activities with both supply chain and logistics players by talking about those entities that are directly involved and directly influence the customs clearance process. Of course, we're going to start with the suppliers, the overseas vendors from whom we as importers buy all of our imported merchandise. We can begin by saying that overseas vendors provide the vast majority of information that will find its way into a customs entry. That statement alone tells us that the suppliers play a big role in the success of our customs entries, and that a great deal of our success as an importer is going to depend on all of the upfront work we do with these vendors to make sure they're doing things right. For a sub-bullet, naturally, the preparation of the commercial invoice and packing list, pursuant to the physical cargo that is being shipped. And it has to match, it has to be identical in description and quantity and value, etc., etc. Even though the supplier doesn't likely prepare this document, said supplier also provides the information that goes onto the transport document. Remember we said, to do a customs entry, we need the info off of the commercial invoice, the packing list, and the transport doc. The vendor provides the first two. The third is likely prepared by an origin freight forwarder, but the information that goes on the transport doc, the ocean bill of lading, the airway bill, is going to come from the vendor. And the information across those docs has to be complete, consistent, and correct, as we spoke of in previous modules. Third bullet. As a quick example, when a vendor works with a forwarder to make a booking for an air, ocean, truck, or rail shipment, the bill of lading number will then be generated. That's a small detail, but not really, because both the vendor and the importer needs the bill of lading number for the vendor to do their export customs clearance from origin, and of course the importer to do the import. One has to have the bill of lading number, airway bill, ocean bill of lading, etc. When working with forwarders, the supplier can't get that number until the forwarder provides it. Some other considerations as vendors engage in activities that influence an entry. Suppliers work with forwarders to determine what vessel and voyage number ocean containers will go on, or flights, for that matter, if it's air freight. That information is needed for a customs entry, too. Somehow, that information has to find its way to the importer and their customs broker so the U.S. customs entry can be completed. Second sub-bullet, we mentioned this briefly in the previous slide. Vendors have to clear origin customs prior to being able to export shipments to the U.S. They need the exact same information that the U.S. importer is going to need. Once again, the coordination between the vendor and the forwarder, which we'll talk about in a minute, specifically said forwarder, is really quite critical. Something we'll talk about in greater detail, the supplier must also work with the U.S. importer and origin forwarder for purposes of the Importer Security Filing 10+2 submission. Quick note, 10+2, it's a maritime supply chain regulatory and legal requirement in the United States. That's going to be covered in detail in an upcoming section. Suffice it to say right now that the ISF 10+2 filing can't happen without the integration of the supplier also. Let's move on to the origin freight forwarder. We mentioned the forwarder a couple of times in working with the supplier. Let's go into a little bit more detail. Although the forwarder provides transportation services, he or she plays a vital role in the customs clearance process. That should be clear by now. For a sub-bullet, as we said, the forwarder works with the supplier on booking, spotting containers, etc. The origin forwarder also prepares all transport documents, the airway bill, ocean bill of lading, etc. We as an importer can't do an entry without that document. Whether it's an airway bill or an ocean bill of lading, doesn't matter. We can't do an entry without it. Also, third sub-bullet, if serving as an NVOCC, which is a term we studied in our module on ocean transportation, the forwarder will also send advance ship notices and or arrival notices. We spoke of both of these electronic documents during that module on ocean freight. In order for an importer working through their customs broker to prepare an entry prior to its arrival, it's only reasonable to state that the information has to be in hand long before the vessel or the aircraft arrives. Advanced ship notices and arrival notices contain that information. Shipment-specific information related to the transport, but also to what is being transported. How those advanced ship notices and or arrival notices are prepared and how detailed they are is a function of how the importer works with the vendor and the origin freight forwarder in the preparation of a standard operating procedure to mandate just how detailed that information has to be. And when we talk about details, we're talking about specific purchase orders down to specific items on a purchase order, their description, quantity, value, etc. That's what drives a customs entry. Last sub-bullet on this slide, upon receiving commercial docs from a vendor, the forwarder should send them all, including the bill of lading, to the destination customs broker. Sometimes the origin freight forwarder and the destination customs broker in the United States are the same company. We talked about this too. They don't have to be the same company. In fact, a U.S. importer doesn't even have to use a customs broker. We'll talk more about that later. Either way, whoever is at origin preparing the documentation, the transport document, and combining it with the commercial invoice and packing list from the vendor needs to get that information to whomever is doing the customs entry at destination. This is a long-standing practice in international trade and a very good, if not the best example of how the logistics/transportation function has to be integrated with the customs clearance function. This is the heart of the matter right here, where transportation and customs clearance come together by sharing information in advance. The forwarder plays a big role in that happening. Whereas we've demonstrated that the freight forwarder plays a big role in the downstream customs clearance process in the U.S., we have to say that so do the carriers, the actual asset providers that are running the ships, that are running the aircraft, trucks, rail cars, etc. The information they generate is equally important to what the forwarder and the supplier do. We say that because an entry can't happen without information from the carriers. Whether a trucker, railroad, airline, NVOCC, or steamship line, customs clearance procedures won't work without input from the carrier. That's just a fact. The reason why we say that, first sub-bullet, is that information from the carriers goes directly on the customs entry. We can't do an entry without information from the carriers. Straight up, simple as that. Carriers also provide information for requirements like the automated manifest system, which we'll be talking about in upcoming slides, but is something that has to be executed in order to even do a customs entry. Third sub-bullet, on the security side of things, ocean carriers also play a vital role in the ISF 10+2 filing process, Importer Security Filing 10+2. ISF is about the physical custodial care of goods being imported into the United States via the maritime transportation chain, meaning the whereabouts and control of containerized cargo in our instance. The ocean carriers have to provide that information. In fact, the 2 part of 10+2 is going to come from the carriers. More on that later. Quick note, naturally, requirements for the AMS system will be covered in an upcoming section. Customs brokers. When we talk about getting close to the actual action of a customs entry, this is about as close as we can get. And we will say that customs brokers can't do much without the input and the provision of information by all of the upstream players that we've spoken of thus far. Why is that? Because brokers prepare customs entries based on the information they receive from the importer as well as those upstream players, starting with the commercial invoice, packing list, and transport doc. A broker is dead in the water if they don't have the information off of those documents. Second sub-bullet, brokers should be working with the origin forwarder to receive shipment details in advance. We've said this a couple of times, and the broker has to be working with the origin forwarder whether they are the same organization or not. That's an important point to make. Regardless of the relationship or lack thereof between an origin freight forwarder and a destination U.S. Customs broker, the lines of communication have to be clear and direct. Because the forwarder is combining the transport document that they prepare with the invoice and the packing list from the vendor, they're going to have all the information at the same time, and that's what the broker needs. Third sub-bullet, customs brokers in the U.S. can submit entries prior to the arrival of a ship or aircraft. The broker needs information anyway, but the way things work in the U.S. with U.S. CBP mandates that they need the information even sooner. We'll explain why in our trade tip. In the United States, customs entries for ocean shipments can be submitted 5 days before a ship arrives, while air freight entries can be presented once goods are confirmed on board a flight, which is known as a wheels-up clearance. Let's hit this again. U.S. importers usually do not have to wait for goods to arrive to the United States to prepare and submit a customs entry. This is CBP regulations we're talking about here. For ocean freight, upon confirming that a vessel is 5 days out of port, the broker can submit the entry on behalf of the U.S. importer. In order to do that, they need all the information we've been talking about thus far. The same applies to air freight, albeit in a shorter time frame. Air freight needs to be confirmed on board, what's called a COB, confirmed on board. A flight coming in from Milan, Italy, from Cairo in Egypt. Once that information is received, a wheels-up clearance can be prepared. This is important for the U.S. importer from a cumulative lead time perspective, meaning that if goods are cleared before they arrive, we as the importer don't have to wait around 2 days, 3 days, maybe 1 day, but it's still more time than we need to be waiting. The coordination between the vendor, the origin forwarder, the importer, and the customs broker for pre-entry of goods has to be very, very tight. We'll see more of that as we proceed. All right. We're going to end this conversation, at least formally, on the integration of supply chain and logistics activities, and now move into the hardcore elements of the customs clearance process. We're going to start with an introduction to U.S. Customs and Border Protection when we come back. We will see you then.